The path to loving yourself unconditionally is a complex and tricky one, but luckily this video is going to start ironing out a lot of these details that you might not be aware of and giving you a good map on really what this is and where to really go, what to actually do, so that you can start making some very meaningful progress in this domain of your life. And I want to start off by discussing how we actually view the mind in our sort of Western modern culture. Because there's a lot of problems that if we aren't aware of them, our ability to actually make progress here is going to not be so good. We're just going to inevitably fall into traps, confusions, delusions, etc. So I want to start by talking about how our mind isn't this sort of unified monolithic entity. What this means, if I can put it in a more simple way, is that our mind isn't kind of just like this one thing that's just existing there and there it is, like mind. That's not really what's happening here. But our mind is actually a collection of sub-personalities or various parts. So our mind is a system, and we can have the sort of whole of the system, and then there's all these sort of interacting parts that all sort of have relationships and connections to each other, aka just kind of sub-personalities relating to each other. So what you really call yourself isn't this sort of fixed, static, one thing, but it's a collection of various things, just like how in your body you have liver cells and skin cells and neurons and all sorts of different microorganisms kind of at work, and then they all kind of work together to create the body. It's the same thing subjectively with your mind. There's all sorts of other parts that are at play that all work together to create your subjective experience. And what I mean by that, if I can put it even in just a simpler way, is that there's just a lot of various interacting components that create your sort of moment-to-moment experience, and all this is kind of going on under the radar in the same way how if you don't take a microscope and look at your body, you're not really going to ever see your skin cells or anything like that. You're just going to be like, oh, look, it's an arm. And then you'll kind of roll on with your life. You're not going to notice that there's bones and there's all sorts of just different cells doing different things with different jobs. You'll just never pay attention to that. In the same way how if you don't actually begin to investigate your mind directly with the sort of right contemplative guides, all this stuff is going to be meaningless to you. You're not ever going to recognize it, and inevitably you're going to fall into traps. So I want to bring up this sort of framework of internal family systems, and if you really want to go deep, I recommend getting this book right here, No Bad Parts. I also recommend this one right here, Somatic Internal Family Systems Therapy. I would just highly recommend that one. And to even go really deep with your emotions and kind of how sneaky it is and how they work, this one right here, Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark, I would highly recommend these 3 books. They're going to totally rearrange your understanding. So your mind is made up of various parts, sub-personalities like your inner critic, your inner child, protector parts, and each part has different needs, different motivations, different fears, and all this stuff kind of develops through life experience. For example, your inner critic, your tendency to criticize and always judge yourself, is developed at a young age, and it mirrors the conditions of your sort of childhood environment, and essentially those conditions that led to you getting approval. So the things that led to you getting approval, those conditions get internalized, and then when you don't act in alignment with those conditions, your mind actually begins to criticize you. So these parts reflect a lot of different emotional states and coping mechanisms. And there's different types of parts, which I'm going to do a small overview of them right now. And I'm really only kind of focusing on the internal family systems model. So there's exiles, and essentially exiles are kind of just parts that we repress. They're often hidden away and they carry pain. That's a core theme of these parts. They're kind of deep in the background, carrying pain, and they're influencing us in a lot of different ways. So they carry fear, shame from the past, embarrassment, guilt, grief, etc. Things that are uncomfortable that we're not really inclined to want to feel or examine, so we just repress them. On top of that, we have managers, which basically try and keep the system in order and in control by not allowing the pain of your exiles to actually surface. So they're essentially just trying to prevent pain from surfacing. They're kind of like this sort of protective layer over the pain. And when that pain inevitably kind of begins to burst out, we have what Richard Schwartz, the creator of internal family systems, what he calls firefighters, which react when the exile's pain breaks through, often using distractions or numbing behavior. So when you're bored or you're sad and you start watching porn or you start scrolling on your phone, etc., some way to kind of numb and distract yourself from your own world. And then at the core of this, we have the self, not sort of ego self, but if you guys are more interested in non-duality, the sort of non-dual self, the very essence of who and what you actually are. So the core of this sort of self with a capital S is compassionate, it's curious, and it's capable of leading the parts in a more harmonious way, where each part begins to get integrated, felt, connected to, they get their own sort of space as well, rather than fighting against everything that's going on. It's essentially just this deeper integration and internal harmony that begins to happen. So the self is not a part that we experience. The self is the very essence of who we are, offering wisdom, deepening awareness, deepening integration, creating internal harmony, and overall balancing the internal system. And a core part of really beginning to love yourself unconditionally is about bringing all these parts into your awareness and allowing the sort of repressed pain, the exiles, to begin to kind of decompress and kind of let go of some of that pain and kind of process it, because otherwise you're going to inevitably be struggling against yourself, fighting against yourself continuously. You're going to be lying to yourself if you're going to say that, I love myself unconditionally, because there's going to be a lot of parts of you that you really don't. It's sort of this like bypassing of what is actually going on. So internal family systems involves connecting with and understanding these parts to resolve inner conflicts. By actually having a good comprehension, good internal map of what's going on, you can start to actually connect it to your direct experience, and using this knowledge, you can actually begin to heal internal conflicts. It most definitely works extremely well. And it promotes internal harmony by giving each part a voice, by giving each part a space to occupy, integrating them in a harmonious way. And this over time allows them to actually trust yourself, self with a capital S here, the very essence of who you actually are, rather than always just kind of fighting and struggling for control. Because essentially a lot of the parts of you are just like fighting, and they're all kind of struggling for control. They kind of want to dominate every other part. Some of them want to, there's a whole bunch of ways that it manifests. But that's a core part. So I want to talk about some of these benefits of viewing the mind as multiple parts. This actually begins to increase your self-awareness quite a lot, because it's just this very clear map of like what's going on beneath the surface, rather than always kind of reacting to what's going on and being kind of ignorant about what's really going on in your internal world and like what are those mechanics. So we kind of recognize that there's different parts, and we can identify inner struggles and understand triggers. We can see that, okay, yeah, when there's pain, right, when an exile's pain begins to emerge, okay, like those firefighters come in, we want to actually numb that pain. It's like, okay, like I'm seeing some deeper patterns of my life that I was ignorant of, and yeah, this stuff is actually really controlling my life. It's making me feel low. It's actually putting me in sort of unconscious reactive patterns, and they're not essentially really healthy for me. Okay, like I'm beginning to recognize this kind of stuff. Another core benefit is compassionate healing. So when we actually stop fighting or suppressing parts, we actually learn to integrate them and develop compassion towards our own internal pain. Having compassion even for your own physical pain, like let's say your knee hurts, instead of saying like, oh, my stupid knee, I hate my knee, I hate this. It's like you actually start to open your heart even to your own pain towards all aspects of yourself. And counterintuitively, this ability bleeds into your relationships and they become far more harmonious. You actually become way better at connecting with others because, again, other people have all this sort of complex stuff going on, and you can actually just relate to them better. You're actually kind of more sensitive to their emotions, their psychology, their state, their energy. You're actually kind of able to detect that and just connect even deeper. So all this kind of work really impacts your intimate relationships, your friendships, all of them. Another core part is just deeper emotional connection and an ability to just feel what's going on, or emotional regulation. I don't really like the term regulation because it implies kind of controlling them and making things operate in a mechanical way, when emotions are this sort of wild, flowing, chaotic energy. But I'll use the term emotional regulation. So by addressing the needs in different parts, you actually create this sort of greater balance and peace, and you allow all your emotions to actually begin to coexist, all your pain to actually exist as well. It's not just pain as well, it's also things like excitement, like bursts of excitement and joy and deep curiosity. It's like we end up getting afraid of like the full spectrum of who we are, even the sort of like positive aspects. We even repress those because we're just kind of like afraid to fully express them. So where do you actually begin to go from here? Like I said, buy those books that I recommended earlier and get that information into your mind immediately. That is like very central to this stuff. But other than that, where do you really go from here? You have to start cultivating your own personal awareness of your parts and your own experience. A good aspect, a good practice so you can start doing this is mindfulness meditation. I talk about it a lot in all of my videos. You need some kind of daily structured practice so that you can just observe yourself rather than always reacting to life, reacting to yourself. Rather than kind of being an unconscious autopilot, you have a way to just observe your experience, start connecting to it, to start being in your body, to start feeling sensation, rather than always being lost in thought, etc. Just essentially disconnected from experience. Even naming your parts, like the inner critic, the inner child, all this stuff begins to kind of build clarity, start building more awareness of your parts. Being able to like apply a label to your experience begins to actually build this sort of model in your mind, and it just is a very clarifying thing to actually have. Another core part is just developing a relationship to all your inner parts. So learning to actually listen to your parts compassionately, asking yourself, what is this part trying to protect me from? Even just asking directly, like, what are you trying to protect me from? Learning to just communicate with all these parts of yourself in a very just direct way. What do you need? And another core part of developing a relationship to your parts is actually learning to be compassionate and grateful for them. Not in a forceful way where like you're trying to like override some kind of emotion because you heard this principle of being gratitude and compassionate. I gotta be grateful, I gotta be compassionate. Right? You're allowing space for everything to exist, but over time, it's like you're kind of slowly building like genuine deep self-compassion for yourself. Learning to, again, open your heart to your own pain, and even being able to thank these parts of yourself for keeping you safe. And counterintuitively, this way of relating to them allows all that protection to kind of soften up. You start to feel safer in your body. You start to feel safer just existing. Another core part is strengthening connection to your actual self, the very essence of who you are. Regular meditation is a good part of that. And even just beginning to embody qualities like compassion, curiosity, courage, right? And even just learning to ask yourself, am I coming from myself or from a part? Where is my behavior actually coming from? And then learning to attune to the quality of like the true essence of who you are. There's a distinct feel to that. There's an alignment to that you have to like intuitively pick up in a very right-brained kind of way, not in a very logical left-brained kind of way. Another core part is just creating inner dialogues. Journaling down a lot of your thoughts and then being able to kind of see like, where is this stuff actually coming from? Learning to map out your inner world, and even just visualizing all the parts inside of you. Maybe like one part of you feels like trapped, so you can like visualize maybe like a kid trapped in a cage, or like a past version of yourself trapped in a cage. but the key's also in the cage. It's like you're holding yourself there. So again, kind of using like imagery to symbolize things to yourself. Another good part is learning to just build trust among your parts. So just learning to kind of like negotiate with your own protective parts. Just appreciating that they exist and then just giving them permission to temporarily just like loosen up, right? Again, engaging in dialogue really works right here. And then even just reassuring exiles. So let vulnerable parts know that they're not going to be abandoned. They're not going to be overwhelmed, because essentially your vulnerable exiled parts were abandoned. They were hurt. They don't trust you, essentially. Like a lot of parts of yourself just simply don't trust you because you haven't been able to lead yourself very well. So then you have this sort of like internal struggle that begins to happen. So even just, building trust among parts, learning to thank them for doing what they're doing, letting them know that like you actually appreciate the full complexity of what's going on inside of you, and learning to really attune to that properly. And even just integrating healing through action. So just practicing compassion externally. I talked about relationships earlier, but even just learning to have compassion for the struggles and pain of other people becomes quite a healing thing for you. It starts to actually open up your own heart. And just even small behavioral shifts. So if a part feels unheard, schedule some time off. Learn to actually listen to the needs of your part. Learning to just listen to the needs of the full complexity of your actual self. Maybe that means taking time off. Maybe that means going for a walk in the woods. Maybe that means doing some kind of creative work. Maybe that means connecting with people. Learning to actually attune to your needs. Learning to actually just be well, take good care of yourself. Eat a well-balanced diet. Eat fresh foods, lots of fruits and veggies. Drink enough water. Exercise. Stretch your body. Make it flexible. Essentially, you're just kind of building health in your overall system. This allows you to feel good. And from that place, everything really begins to flow a lot smoother. Things just simply begin to work. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working one-to-one with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.